DerbyNet is the new standard for race management software for Pinewood Derby events. It's used by scouting and other groups all across the country and around the globe. It's free and it's open source. If you're using something else, you and your audience are missing out. Look for it on GitHub. Many times, an organization running a Pinewood Derby race has some internal subdivisions, and you may wish to have the race structure match the organization structure in some way. For example, many Cub Scout packs race by den. DerbyNet provides several choices to let you structure your race as you choose. This video will explain DerbyNet's race structuring options and how you might use them. The first question you'll need to ask yourself about structuring is, should an individual heat incorporate racers from different subdivisions? Or, to put it in concrete Cub Scout terms, should racers from one den be in the same heat as racers from another den? DerbyNet lets you partition the racing field into groups. Each heat is populated from racers in a single group. Many Cub Scout units group by dens. In addition to dividing the field for scheduling purposes, groups also have a role in figuring speed award winners. DerbyNet calculates standings for speed and identifies speed award winners in each group as well as for the field of racers overall. The most common way to form groups in DerbyNet is to do so during roster import. On the Import Roster page, there's a required column label to mark the group each racer belongs to. New groups are created as needed during import. It's also possible to make new groups directly from the Setup page by visiting the Group Editor. Here you can make new groups, rename a group, delete a group, or just change the order in which the groups should appear. By default, all the heats in one group's racing round run, and then the next group's round runs, and so on. So perhaps all the lions race first, and then all the tigers, and then all the wolves, and so on. Some organizations don't care for this format. There's a concern that racers in a group lose interest if there are long stretches when their group isn't racing. Interleaved Heats tries to address this concern by spreading out each group's heats. With interleaved heats, a heat for lions might be followed by a heat for wolves and then a heat for bears and so on before getting back around to another heat for lions. Interleaved heats can be selected on the Settings page. Note that in order for interleaving to be effective, you must generate heat schedules for more than one group. Not every race chooses to divide up the field into groups for racing. If you want to select racers for each heat by drawing from the whole field, you just specify that the whole field is one big group. Then the scheduler just sees one pool of racers and will form heats accordingly. In addition to groups that determine boundaries for purposes of scheduling heats, your organization may have additional subdivisions that don't affect scheduling, but which you may want to recognize when figuring standings and determining award winners. As its name implies, subgroups describe organizational divisions within a group. For example, a Cub Scout pack that uses one big group for scheduling might still want to award trophies for the fastest racers in each den. Subgroups could be used to represent dens in this case. As with groups, you can change the label used for subgroups from the Settings page. You may also want to adjust the number of speed awards calculated per subgroup. Another situation in which subgroups might arise occurs when a few of your potential groups are so small that you want instead to combine them into a single group for scheduling. In this case, use subgroups to identify the individual small subdivisions in the combined group. The other groups will each have just one subgroup. As you're using groups only for scheduling in this situation, you'd probably want to figure standings and award winners on a per subgroup basis only, and not on a per group basis. As mentioned already, DerbyNet calculates standings and speed awards across the whole field, in addition to calculating results for each group and each subgroup. Sometimes that's still not enough, and we want a way to see standings and compute awards across more than one group, but less than the whole field. DerbyNet provides aggregate groups for this purpose. A natural use for aggregate groups would be a Cub Scout pack that races by den, but also includes an outlaw group. Standings and award recipients will be computed for each group, including the outlaw group, and for the field overall, but what we want in this case is to identify the fastest cars among just the Scouts, exclusive of the Outlaw group. We can get that by making an aggregate group that rolls up just the Scout dens. There are two ways to create an aggregate group. One is to create an aggregate racing round from the Race Coordinator page. Use this method if you want to have a runoff race to determine the champions for your aggregate class. To create an aggregate group without more racing, go to the Setup page and navigate to the Group Editor. The Add Aggregate button lets you define a new aggregate group, including specifying what groups roll up into the aggregate group. Aggregate groups are the solution in some other situations, too. Suppose two packs or two organizations decide to combine their Pinewood Derby because they have only one track between them. Each organization still wants to recognize the fastest racers in their respective organizations without directly competing with their neighbors. Defining two aggregate groups lets each organization retain its identity within the combined racing field. It's even possible to form aggregate groups out of other aggregate groups. Using our example of two packs racing together, suppose we're talking about a community-wide event that includes an outlaw group. Suppose further that we want to recognize the fastest scout racer in town, which once again means we want to exclude the outlaws. Just as you'd expect, we can form a new aggregate group for this purpose out of the two existing aggregate groups. I hope this video has helped you gain a better understanding of DerbyNet's group, subgroup, and aggregate group constructs. Check out the DerbyNet page on GitHub.io and be sure to have a look at our other videos. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your Pinewood Derby event.